Okay, let's talk about immigration. It's one of those topics that it instantly cranks up the temperature in any room, right? It's personal, it's emotional, and right now it feels like it's at the absolute center of everything. But what if the way we're all being pushed to talk about it is a complete misdirection? This isn't about being pro or anti immigration, not really. It's about being against the argument that uses immigration to hide much bigger problems. It's about seeing the sleight of hand for what it is. So let's dive in. This quote right here, this gets to the absolute heart of what we're talking about today. It's basically saying, hey, your frustrations are real, but your focus is being deliberately pointed in the wrong direction. We're being told to get angry at the person right next to us instead of asking who broke the queue in the first place, and more importantly, why. And let's be super clear about this from the get-go. The frustration is 100% real. That anger you might feel about insane housing prices, wages that don't go anywhere, or just that feeling of being squeezed, that's not in your head. It is a completely legitimate response to very real pressures. I mean, when you see 50 people lining up just to look at a single rental, or you're stuck in traffic that just seems to get worse every single year, that's not some kind of illusion. You're correctly seeing that the system is under an immense amount of strain. That feeling that the container is full, it's a totally rational one because it's based on what you see every day. So, whenever things get tough and people, start to get angry, a very simple, very convenient story seems to emerge from our political class. And if it feels familiar, that's because it is. It's a story we have been told over and over again. A story that relies on finding a simple cause and, more importantly, a simple target for our very complex problems. Just look at this. You can see it laid out over 3 decades. The names change, the faces change, the specific group in the crosshairs changes, from Asian immigrants with Pauline Hanson to international students with Peter Dutton. But the playbook? It is identical. Find a vulnerable group and then make them the face of everything that's wrong with the country. So why does this pattern keep repeating itself? I mean, what if this whole story isn't actually about solving big problems like housing or wages? What if it's about something else entirely, like winning an election and holding on to power? This is where a concept from our source material called the law of projection becomes incredibly useful. Okay, so here's the crucial point. When a government is in deep trouble, when it's maybe looking at a massive failure at the polls, it has a way to change the entire conversation. It can project its own internal crisis onto an external group. It literally transforms a debate about its own bad performance into a manufactured crisis about national security or national identity. And this timeline, wow, it just perfectly illustrates this law of projection in action. Back in 2001, the Howard government was facing an almost certain election loss. So what happened? They seized on a humanitarian incident. By deploying troops and, yes, knowingly lying to the public about children being thrown overboard, they successfully turned a group of desperate people into an existential threat. And they rode that wave of fear all the way to an improbable election win. It's just a stark reminder of how easily fear can be weaponized. But, the political motive? That's only half the story. The sources we're looking at suggest there's a much bigger, much more powerful financial reason why this official story about immigration and housing just doesn't add up. It's a motive that has way less to do with votes and a whole lot more to do with money. And this right here is the central, kind of baffling question, isn't it? If a government truly believed that immigration was the #1 cause of the housing crisis, why on earth would it keep immigration levels at record highs? It seems completely illogical. Unless the immigration isn't the problem. What if it's the solution to a much bigger, much more hidden crisis? So this slide breaks down a pretty startling theory. It suggests that our banks are dangerously overexposed to a housing bubble. And to prevent a crash that would basically trigger a full-blown financial crisis, the argument is that governments use high immigration to create this constant massive demand for housing. That demand props up prices, keeping them artificially high. In this view, immigrants aren't the cause of the crisis. They're being used as a kind of human shield to protect the entire financial system at your expense. And that financial shield theory, well, it gets even more compelling when you look at this. There is an absolutely overwhelming consensus among every single major economic institution. We're talking our own Treasury, our Reserve Bank, the IMF, the OECD, the whole lot, that immigration is a massive net positive for the Australian economy. It boosts our GDP, it increases workforce participation, and it makes the country wealthier. The political story and the economic reality are polar opposites. And here's a number that really puts it all into perspective. Get this. According to the Australian Treasury Zone modeling, each permanent migrant from the 2018-19 intake is projected to contribute, on average, $127,000 more to the government's budget over their lifetime than the average resident. Think about it. They arrive already educated on another country's dime, they work, they pay taxes, and they're often legally blocked from accessing benefits for years. In purely financial terms, they are a huge win for Australia. This just completely blows up the narrative that they're a drain on resources. But here's the thing. This strategy of political and financial scapegoating, it isn't just some cynical game. This constant drumbeat of blame, this framing of actual human beings as threats or problems, it has very real, very serious consequences. It opens the door to something much, much darker. Now, what's really interesting, and frankly pretty chilling about this slide, is the direct comparison it draws. On the left, you see how Nazi propaganda used these biological metaphors, describing people as poison, to dehumanize them. And on the right, you see how modern political rhetoric echoes that exact same language. The function is identical: reclassify human beings as contaminants. It makes it so much easier to argue for their removal. It is a very dangerous path, and it's one we have seen before. And this leads directly to a really dangerous convergence. See, when mainstream politicians constantly frame immigrants as a threat, it normalizes that idea in society. It creates fertile ground for extremist groups who then pop up at rallies, sometimes standing right alongside those same politicians. The rhetoric acts as a gateway drug, making extremism seem mainstream. It's a dangerous game that puts real people's lives at risk. So, if the debate we're being sold is basically a distraction, what's the real choice we're facing? Well, it requires us to look past the scapegoat and start focusing on these systemic failures that they are being used to cover up. So here it is, the crucial point. We are being offered a completely false choice. We're being told to fight with the person next to us in the queue over a scarcity of housing and services. But that scarcity, it was created by decades of policy failure. The real choice isn't about the people in the queue. It's whether we finally demand accountability from the people who designed the queue to be this way from the start. And I guess, ultimately, this is the question we're left with. Are we so busy arguing about who gets the last deck chair, so distracted by this fight that's been manufactured for us, that we failed to notice the ship itself has a massive hole in it? The real challenge isn't about who we let on board. It's about demanding that those in charge finally start fixing the hull.